Peter Hain.
On ISIL, I agree with the government that it would be a folly for Western powers like Britain to barge in cowboy-like and lead the fight against them. But we do have unique military surveillance and intelligence capabilities which those on the front line fighting ISIL do not, and which, if and only if they request, should be deployed. That has been the case in northern Iraq, with the request from the Iraqi government, the Kurds and the minorities which risk extermination by ISIL, and very significantly, if covertly, from Iran. That Iran has given its de facto blessing to US airstrikes is of seismic importance. It's opening the opportunity for future engagement and collaboration which could be transformative for the whole region, including possibly Israel-Palestine. We also agree on helping local Iraqi and Kurdish forces defeat ISIL by airstrikes, supplying military equipment and other military and intelligence support. That has clearly been the only force capable of stemming ISIL's remorseless and ruthless advance. Which brings us to the elephant in the room, Syria. ISIL will not be defeated if it is constantly allowed to regroup there, because it is from its Syrian bases that it's launched into Iraq. It has to be confronted and defeated in Syria too. And like it or not, that means engagement with the Syrian regime. Nobody disagrees that Assad is a barbarous, blood-soaked dictator, but he heads the Syrian government. He's backed by approximately 40% of the population. Surely by now at least, the UK government and the US must acknowledge that he's not going to be defeated. Not because the Prime Minister was prevented by this House from getting his way with airstrikes, and before that with arming Assad's opponents, and not because this House said no to pulling Britain into the quagmire of the Syrian civil war, trapped between Sunni and Shia, between ISIL and Assad, between Saudis and Iranians in their proxy conflict. Contrary to the line peddled by the Foreign Secretary regrettably today, there is no prospect of getting a transition in Syria without negotiating with Assad and his regime, especially with Russia standing behind it. Our failure to understand this is a major reason why the civil war has been so prolonged and why ISIL has been allowed to flourish. The PM, of course, yes.
What kind of morality is it which says that if a bully is a successful bully, then we should want to be friends with him and completely stand on our heads the policy of trying to get rid of him?
Befriending Assad, it's about recognizing the reality of moving forward. And if we don't recognize the reality, we won't move forward. We'll continue to shout and scream and oppose to no effect at all. Of course, yes.
Given that the Right Honourable Member is arguing that Bashar al-Assad's main incentive for working with us is the fact that we're worried about terrorism in his eastern frontier, why would he cooperate rather than leave those terrorists there, given that those terrorists are the main underpinning legitimacy now of his regime? Why would he work with us on this, sincerely?
To that and explain. The Prime Minister has described President Assad as illegitimate, implying that Britain and the US could act in Syria with impunity. But surely this position is legally questionable, given that Assad won recent, admittedly highly manipulated elections and that the divided rebel factions do not constitute an alternative government. Russia, Assad's ally, would likely veto any attempt to gain United Nations authority for airstrikes. And Assad can deploy sophisticated Russian-made air defense systems and fighter planes. His air capacity may have been degraded, especially over those parts of Syria he no longer controls, but it is still formidable. I simply do not see how we could mount airstrikes, as I believe we have to in Syria, to degrade and help defeat ISIL without engaging the regime in some way. That does not mean befriending Assad. It does not mean legitimizing his regime in any way. It could mean back-channel contact. But whatever the means, a way has to be found to clear the path for airstrikes. It also means engaging with Iran and also with Russia, again difficult, especially given Putin's behavior in Ukraine, but essential in my view. The government knows full well that I've been a consistent critic of its Syria policy, as ill-conceived and ultimately counterproductive, as indeed I believe events have proved. But we don't have to agree on that to find common ground over urgent action to tackle the barbarous medieval threat of ISIL and act now. On Ukraine, Mr. Deputy Speaker, I think that Europe's and NATO's further push right up onto Russia's front door is ill-advised. Western political bluster, military bombast and tit-for-tat sanctions will not resolve the problem. Why not instead press for a negotiated agreement, however difficult, where Ukraine is militarily neutral, meaning no membership of either NATO or certainly a Russian military pact, a status comparable to that of Finland, but without Finnish membership, obviously, of the EU. It would be guaranteed by Moscow and Washington. There will be no further NATO encirclement or enlargement around Russia's borders in return for no illegal or aggressive moves by Russia in Ukraine, Moldova, or any of its other neighbours. I think this should be part of a geopolitical deal with the European Union too, in which it, like NATO, recognises limits to its eastward expansion. I'm getting cheered from the Eurosceptics I continuously oppose as a pro-European, Mr. Deputy Speaker, but I still believe that that is the right policy. Europe's March 2014 agreement with Ukraine should be revisited to offer a reciprocal agreement between Russia and Ukraine with guarantees for Moscow on both trade and political cooperation. Trade and cooperation agreements with these countries, including Ukraine, is desirable, but not full European Union membership. I believe such a strategy offers a far more promising route to ending the current mutually damaging conflict which has engulfed Ukraine. But again, it does not mean treating Putin as a buddy. It does not mean endorsing his nakedly manipulative aggression, his authoritarianism, or his shameful human rights record. It simply means acknowledging that Russia's backyard matters greatly to it, just as ours does to us. Then we might be able to build stability and peace in that region. Mr. Deputy Speaker, as will be apparent, I've got big areas of agreement with the government's approach, but big areas of disagreement as well on especially Syria and indeed the whole approach to the Middle East region, but also in terms of Russia and Ukraine. I do hope the government will think again about these matters. I think there's a prospect of moving forward in both areas. It's going to be very, very difficult. There will be all sorts of setbacks, but I'm confident and I'm absolutely certain that pursuing the policy that we're currently pursuing is going to bring no practical and positive results at all.